and welcome back to Analog Slop, where two music industry lifers revisit the enemy and melody maker of their youth, which in our case is the 90s. We're exploring artists we discovered as wide-eyed teenagers, only to disown as sneering 20-somethings. Now, unshackled from our hipster baggage, we dive deep into the pre-digital age to look back on a time when music news came but once a week. My name is Graham Best. I've worked in music publishing and music tech for over 20 years.
And my name is Adam Bushell. I've been a music supervisor for 20 years.
Each week, one of us will read the NME, one of us will read the Melody Maker, and we will pick out the most interesting stories and discuss them.
Join us this week for part one of our two-part look at the NME and Melody Maker from the 29th of April 1995. This week, we'll be looking at the live return of the Stone Roses and Scott Walker's Tilt. It is the 29th of April 1995. This week, I have the NME, Graham had the Melody Maker. NME cover stars this week are Hole, alongside the headline Courtney Love on Kurt, Stipe, Cope, Trent, Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll, The Whole Truth. Also promised, Live Bonanza featuring Oasis, Supergrass, Elastica and more. I don't know about you, Graham. Honestly, like, when was it not a live bonanza in the NME and Melody Maker? It's just like endless live reviews.
Yeah, like especially during this era, like Melody Maker can easily run to like a dozen pages.
Yes, exactly. There's no room left for the think piece. Do you know what I mean? Which we so rely on these days. Just endless live reviews. Also teased on the cover rather ominously. Headline / statement: Stone Roses on stage again. Which is, I guess them being diplomatic on covering that performance.
Have I got things to say about that this week?
I'm looking forward to it. In the news, New Scotland Yard are investigating an obscenity claim made by a mother whose daughter bought the Out Here Brothers album.
Well, that was her first mistake. That doesn't strike me as an album artist.
Yeah, well, yeah. The album is called One Polish, Two Biscuits and a Fish Sandwich. She was shocked to find her 10-year-old daughter was allowed to buy an album which contained tracks such as I'll Lick My Pussy and Fuck You in the Ass. For context, the Out Here Brothers were enjoying crossover success at the time with the hip house songs Boom Boom Boom, which was later covered by the Teletubbies, and Don't Stop Wiggle Wiggle.
I always wondered if like the big singles were radio edits and the actual hooks were far filthier on the album.
I remember I had a friend who liked the Out Here Brothers and owned those singles and the album, and yeah, there was much debate about the filth contained therein. Ben Wilmot uses opinion column Nag 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 to complain about the intimidating atmosphere, poor customer service, and outright hostility your average buyer experiences at dance music specialist shops. This was a very real thing in the 90s. Our local dance music store, Dance 2 Records in Guildford, was definitely guilty of this.
Fucking hell, that was a scary place.
That was a scary place. So new releases were kept behind an elevated, chained-off area that you had to ask to access. This was first after being asked what genre you were interested in, so you could be led to the music from said genre, and only that genre, by an expert who would basically intimidate you into buying whatever he thought was good.
Whatever wasn't shifting.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not making this up. I mean, it's crazy. It basically stood next to you whilst you looked through the new releases. It was very strange.
I think to this day, my attitudes towards drum and bass are kind of in some way shaped by like the terror of trying to get into drum and bass through that shop.
It was awful. And also, in terms of genre pecking order, they're at the top. You know, for UK listeners, you can identify with this. Like dance music, like the coolest people were into that. Do you know what I mean? And associated genres, and then on down is the way genres go. So you know, it's like the indie stores may have been kind of intimidating, but the people in them were way nicer because you know. How can I put this?
Yeah, how can you put this? I can't wait to see where this goes.
Well,
Those little dweebs needed all the friends they could get.
There you go. I'll leave it there. Um, so there are interviews with Method Man and Pavement. On bands are Asian Dub Foundation, Sonar Nation, and Vic Chestnut. Heard of two or three of those. There is a recurring feature around this time called We Have Ways of Making You Talk, where artists ask incredibly blunt and basically rude questions. This week's victim is the Boo Radley's Martin Carr, who, amongst other things, is asked, "You're too ugly to ever be proper pop stars, aren't you?" And I suppose you think being quite good now makes up for all those years of being crap.
It's a question submitted by reader Adam, 15. Why aren't you as good as Teenage Fan Club?
Well, the thing is, yeah, they also blame them for inventing shoegaze, which is a bit weird.
That feels a stretch.
It is a stretch, yeah. And Martin Carr very much wants to distance himself from shoegaze, as you can imagine. Funny how things have inverted in the 21st century. Groove Check singles reviews, quite interesting, as it features a one-paragraph review for a pre-Train Spotting soundtrack appearance of Born Slippy by Underworld, which is described like this. Starts promising enough in fresh and fruity drum and bass style before
What?
metamorphosizing yeah, I know, before metamorphosizing uncomfortably into a cumbersome techno stomp with outmoded floaty bits. What a difference a year will make when those outmoded floaty bits will be absolutely everywhere.
Fucking hell. Like, I'm scared to ask who reviewed that.
Groove Check singles reviews were Ben Wilmot.
That's weird. Like, I remember him being pretty knowledgeable. Oh, well.
I don't think it's a case of knowledge. I'm always not really making fun of him. It's just the fact that he was like, I don't know. It's like no one predicted this kind of non-album single would be so ubiquitous and just completely tied to the moment. And certainly not him. You'd think the review of Born Slippy would be like, "This is amazing. You know, watch out, world. You know, here comes Born Slippy."
Maybe this is my shopping at Dance 2 PTSD, but I do not understand how you could mistake the opening of Born Slippy for drum and bass.
Fair enough. Briefly onto cover stars whole, because we've covered them quite a lot recently. They seem to be frankly falling apart. Just in terms of timing, so it's 1 year since the death of Kurt Cobain, 10 months since the death of original whole bassist Kristen Pfaff. Is that how you say her name?
I think so.
And they are 8 months into a world tour. So I'll just let those dates sit with you for a minute.
Yeah, God.
Yeah, I know. There's a fascinating live review of Oasis, post some might say pre What's the Story Morning Glory, where reviewer Stuart Bailey suggests Oasis needs some recovery time to find some songs that rival Blur and imminently Black Grape. They will rival both of those quite well.
Yeah, they'll they'll pull that off, in all
Yeah,
fairness.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. It all worked out fine for them. Single of the week is awarded to Follow the Leader by Parliament Funkadelic and the P-Funk All-Stars. In his, re- in his review, Johnny Cigarettes refers to George Clinton as the grizzled Jimmy Savile of funk. um,
Unfortunate.
yes, well, I'd like to say Jimmy Savile meant something different in 1995, but he didn't really. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's unfortunate. Lead album reviews are Red Medicine by Fugazi, which gets a 6. This Is How We Do It by Montel Jordan gets a 7. Nemesis by Babes in Toyland, which gets a 4. And Alien Lanes by Guided by Voices, which gets an 8. Special mention for the new Terence Trent D'Arby album reviewed this issue called Terence Trent D'Arby's Vibrator. It contains a song called Supermodel Sandwich and receives a 10 out of 10. I'm kidding. 2 out of 10.
I'm disappointed. I was hoping the enemy had really lent into the bit there.
No, unfortunately not. Right, that's it for the enemy. What's going on in the Melody Maker?
Oh, what isn't going on? Well, so the cover has the headline Marion in all caps. Marion being the kind of goth light sort of yeah, like a staging post between goth and Britpop, circa 1995.
Young singer, that's all I remember about them.
Yeah, so you've got Marion in all caps and the question, a Joy Division for the 90s, along with a massive picture of lead singer James in a black shirt against a purple background. I'm going to choose to assume that's a rhetorical question. It's another busy cover, almost as if the Melody Maker might not necessarily have the courage of their cover star convictions. So we've got a free tape stuck on the front, featuring Melody Maker tour participants Drugstore, My Life Story, Goya Dress, and Stumm. I think two of those we're aware of. I was not aware of Goya Dress or Stumm.
Shame on you.
Yeah, I know. Well, hang my head. We got headlines for Oasis, Noel and Liam, Brothers in War, and another headline for Stone Roses Live, special report from Oslo.
Stone Roses, wow, in Oslo.
uh, you know what? I was going to go into this episode with a moratorium on we'll get into it,
Yeah.
but we will get into it.
Okay, fair enough.
um, Otherwise, elsewhere on the cover, you can win Pulp Fiction videos in a particularly 1995 move. No doubt be the envy of your student halls. You can also win Reading Festival tickets to celebrate the end of a no doubt grueling exam results season. And finally, getting a cover mention are Portishead, Hull, Warren G, Mercury Rev, Banco de Gaia, Delicatessen, and Nick fucking Hornby.
Do they put the fucking in between Nick and Hornby?
No, they don't. That's entirely my own editorializing. Notable news roundup. First up, we've got a fairly straightforward one. Pulp's only UK festival date of the year has been announced. They've been announced as headliners of the Melody Makers' own branded day at the Heineken Music Weekender in Leeds this coming May of 95. Interestingly, we're still way out from the full Pulp explosion. Common People isn't released as a single for another month, and the Different Class album won't hit stores till September. So this is pretty astute booking from Melody Maker. Also appearing on that Melody Maker day are Sleeper, Menswear, Salad, Skunk and Nancy, The Blue Tones, Smash, 60 Foot Dolls, Powder, and Catatonia. So we are
Wow.
beyond a shadow of a doubt in 1995.
It's funny though, so as you get lower down that bill, some of those bands are really on the way out.
Yeah, Smash are fucked.
That's it, yeah, Smash have peaked and are on their way out, yeah.
And some of those bands are pretty early on, like Catatonia is in 1995. That's embryonic, I'd say. There is not a lot of documentation on this, but the Heineken Weekender, from what I've been able to piece together, was an early example of an indie-themed corporate sort of semi-boutique festival that traveled around the regional markets of the UK. So the previous year it had been in Preston, and that was Oasis's first ever festival show in 1994. And the year before that, the 1993 edition was in Swansea and is notable for turning into a borderline riot after Nicky Wire wears a Cardiff City football shirt on stage, who continue to be ferocious rivals of Swansea City football team. And a bunch of very drunk Swansea supporters use it as an excuse to bottle everyone. The other story I want to talk about is well, it's a classic. It's under the headline "Pirates Scuppered," and it starts with the incredible line: "Music fans were dealt another blow by the BPI this week."
I just
um,
remember them just constantly being in my face during the 90s. I was like, "God, the
yeah.
BPI, they got us again."
Shake you down as you walked out of sound barrier. The BPI, for anyone not up to speed with the drier aspects of the UK music industry, is the trade body for record labels. And I think it's fair to say it had a couple of decades of a fairly combative relationship with the press, both music and otherwise. It exists to this day and is also responsible for organising the Brit Awards and the Mercury Prize. A couple of gems from this article. First up, the lead here is a story about a crackdown on Australian bootleg live CDs being imported into the UK via a shop in Holloway. That's happening because, and I was genuinely surprised about this, bootlegging was legal in Australia until July 1995 when the law was changed. The article also mentions Italy as being the source of the best bootlegs because of historically lax approach to copyright enforcement, but notes with a tinge of sadness that legislation is being tightened up by the Italian government following pressure from major labels. For what it's worth, I sort of remember this. The good shit on Camden Market would usually have Italian logos and some weird mangled English on the sleeves.
Okay.
Finally, and most ominously, the article claims that the BPI, remember we're in 1995, are rumoured to have hired a, air quotes, internet consultant to fight the possibility of piracy on the net.
Oof. Unfortunately, that consultant turned out to be Sean Parker.
What a way to identify an opportunity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Other news in brief, very quickly. The Wild Hearts have run away to New York, set fire to the Chelsea Hotel, and are banned from shooting the Jim Rose circus style video they want to by their label. There's no source given here. It sounds like it all came straight from the band or their management. Eddie Vedder has teamed up with Stuart Copeland from The Police to collaborate on a new project. Didn't expect that. EMF have also set fire to a hotel, but in Bristol, which probably speaks to EMF's commercial appeal in 1995. Jeff Buckley is rumoured to be appearing at the South Bank with the London Symphony Orchestra as part of Elvis Costello's Meltdown shows. And finally, the drummer from The Wonder Stuff doesn't think Britpop is very good, which is a bit like Slug doubts nutritional benefit of salt.
Is that what's is that it's a spin-off band? I know where you live. We know where you live. Is it part of that?
I think so. Although I thought there was a different Wonder Stuff spin-off band. Maybe that came after that.
We Know Where You Live are featured in this week's NME, and I thought it was like all the members of the Wonder Stuff minus Miles Hunt.
Yeah, because Miles Hunt goes off and I think he forms a band called Vent or something.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah. Anyway, you can tell that neither of us know or are infused much about the Wonder Stuff. Finally, the path's not taken this week. Advanced artists are Annie Williams, Small Factory, and Bush. There are live reviews of Portishead, The Verve, Hole, and Warren G. There's that centre spread on Marion. Single of the week includes someone called 66 Sunback, who I've never heard of. Supergrass's Lenny, and the remixes of Sabres of Paradise's Wonderful Tow Truck. Lead album reviews are Mercury Rev's infuriating See You on the Other Side, which is a train wreck but contains their best song. Their best song being Sudden Ray of Hope. Corner Shop's second album, the extremely promising Woman's Gotta Have It, which is the one where they start getting into sampling, and also contains two versions of a track called Jolanda Shear on it, which is like this absolutely amazing Bangor Spacemen Free sort of track, which I've completely fallen in love with the last few weeks.
Due to the incessant corner shop coverage that was in the
Yeah, I
first
know.
half of the 90s in the weeklies.
You couldn't move for corner shop. What else is in there? Banco de Gaya's Last Train to Lhasa gets a review. That's an ambient techno concept album about the Chinese occupation of Tibet, which apparently floats Melody Maker's boat. And Delicatessen's Skin Touching Water is in there as well. Finally, there are interviews with each of the acts on that tape who are all on the Maker Shaker package tour. And that is the Melody Maker.
This week, one of the lead album reviews in The Enemy is Tilt by Scott Walker. It is reviewed by John Mulvey under the heading Gravitas Diggers. Did you get that, Graham?
Yes, just about.
It receives 8 out of 10. I would say Scott Walker is an artist with almost no analogue. Mulvey summarizes his career like this: a man who started off as an MOR crooner and then stretched the parameters of music with a series of frighteningly ambitious, shamelessly intellectual solo albums. Mulvey is hugely impressed by both this record and Walker himself. He describes the album as somber, unnerving, ominous, and that it does perhaps redefine the word difficult. And Walker himself as a moody, existential poser without equal, and one of pop's few bona fide geniuses. The closest he comes to caving to a 90s snide remove is when he says it's easy, all right, irresistible to joke about a record so evidently bound up with portent and high seriousness. But the spell of the record is too strong for him. He goes on, but there's a sense of drama and ambition that Walker brings to every last second of Tilt that is utterly astonishing. There's a tension running through the review between admiration and disorientation. He keeps circling the idea that this might be too much, even as he praises it. The main thrust of the piece is that this is not a record you can get your head around in one listen. He says, hearing it once is like visiting, say, the Grand Canyon for seconds. Impressive for sure, but you need a lot longer to really appreciate it. Referencing Walker's 60s solo career, he closes the review by pondering whether after 2,000 listens, it ranks alongside those first four magnificent albums remains to be seen. And this is really the key framing of the review. Not is it good, but are you prepared to meet it on its own terms? As we kind of covered briefly before, I really remembered this review. It really stuck in my head.
Yeah, yeah.
When we did our 1995 Christmas special, Tilt was in the NME Top 50 albums of that year, and we touched on it briefly. I had the Melody Maker that week, and they didn't include it in their list. Obviously, they had to leave room for Whale, Urge Overkill, and the John Spencer Blues Explosion.
And all your other favourites.
One of the favourites. But the idea that this was a record that required 2,000 listens to get really burrowed into my teenage mind. I had this idea that Walker's career and this album in particular was like a kind of music nerd final boss. I found his music intimidating, and I would be well into my 20s before I accepted the challenge and waded in. Do you remember the coverage of this album got in 1995? And also, when did you cave in and accept the Walker's challenge?
um, I was dimly aware of this in 1995. Like, I remember it mainly from that end of year best albums list. That would have been my introduction to it, I think, because I wasn't reading NME yet. I was a couple of months off. I remember it was such a no, that tiny little description in the top 50 albums list, like, really stuck with me. Like, to your point, like, about it being some sort of, like, final boss of difficult music, like, it still sort of has that reputation in my head. It's like it's a very intimidating album. I'm interested in how Mulvey's kinda linking it to the '60s albums for a couple of reasons. One is that I don't think Scott 1 and Scott 2, the first two solo albums from the '60s, are particularly great albums. So the idea of holding those two albums up as like works of genius or even very, very good albums, like, feels a stretch to me. The other is that Scott 3 and 4, which I agree are works of genius, like, those really are fantastic albums. Tilt has so little to do with them. Like, Tilt is an artist, like, coming at things from a very, very different angle. Like, fundamentally, Scott 3 and 4, we're still talking about, a kind of a fairly conventional approach to songwriting. And Tilt is like, you know, you're going to struggle to find a memorable hook on Tilt, although there are some.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of gonna we're kind of gonna get into it, and his relationship to the '60s in the '90s, and also the '90s relationship to the '60s, and because he kind of arrives at quite an interesting time if you think about it. Him returning peak Britpop is like quite something, and there's some kind of behind the scenes machinations which I wasn't 100% aware of, which we'll kind of get into a bit later about how and why he kind of reappeared. But yeah, as you said, it's kind of a long path to Tilt where he records lots of different types of music. He was born Noel Scott Engel in Hamilton, Ohio in 1943. He was a child actor and singer performing on stage and television under the name Scotty Engel. Then in his teens, he begins a recording career under the name Scott Engel, making pop records. His image and the music he makes at this time, the very kind of Paul Anka-esque or Paul Anka's music of the same period. In the early 60s, he forms the Walker Brothers in LA with John Mouse and Gary Leeds. They each take on the stage name Walker and move to London for two reasons. One, to escape the British invasion, and two, to escape the draft of the Vietnam War, basically. They enjoy a few years of success with a kind of Phil Spector indebted orchestral pop sound, heavy on melodrama, and with Scott Walker's distinctive baritone at the foreground. This band was huge in the UK, and Walker was a genuine star and teen idol. A much reported fact is that at their peak of their popularity, their fan club had more members than the Beatles. Um, Obviously, by which I mean their fan club had more members, not the band. I'm not saying their fan club had 5 members, just to be clear.
Wow.
Yeah.
5 whole fans.
Um, as the Walker brothers are kind of winding down over late 67, early 68, Scott Walker embarks on a solo career. Using a newfound love of Jacques Brel as his inspiration, he records 4 solo albums in quick succession, beginning in the world of orchestral pop and becoming more experimental with each release, culminating in Scott 4, which is a high creative watermark, but a commercial flop. Creatively, he's undergone a full transformation from sophisticated teeny bopper pin-up to avant-garde auteur. The flop of the 4th album, Scott 4, leads to his record label Philips putting an end to his creative freedom and laying down the law pretty heavily in regard to what he could and could not record. There is a bridge album, Till the Band Comes In, which contained 10 Walker compositions and 5 easy listening standards, but the subsequent failure of this album ushers in a new era of unadventurous, inoffensive MOR, albeit performed with his incredible voice. During this time, the Walker Brothers return in 1974, recording a series of albums and having one more genuine hit with No Regrets in 1975, which is taken from an album of the same name released that year. They're unable to capitalize on this success, however, and the follow-up record Lines, released in 1976, is a flop. They have one more album due with their contract with GTO Records, who in the late 70s is going out of business. Feeling they have nothing to lose, the band released the album Night Flights in 1978.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are 10 tracks on this record, with each member contributing their own compositions. Scott gets 4, Gary gets 2, and John gets 4. Scott's tracks on this album are a kind of cinematic, high-tension, minimalist art pop. Dissonant and challenging, lyrically exploring themes like political torture and state violence, often through highly coded language that required homework from the listener. The template for the rest of Walker's career has been set. These tracks sound much closer to Tilt than anything he did in the 60s. Though Night Flights is again a commercial failure, his reputation as a maverick genius is growing. In 1981, Fire in the Sky, the godlike genius of Scott Walker, is compiled by Julian Cope and released on Zoo Records, collecting tracks from his now out-of-print first 5 solo albums. There was a side note. I've noticed Cope has been a bit sneery about Walker's music in recent years. By recent years, I mean the last 20 years. Falling into the trap of the digger who kind of elevates himself above the treasures they unearth, which I always find incredibly obnoxious. I'm looking at you, Morgan Geist. um, Off the back of this critical rehabilitation, he signs to Virgin Records. I don't know if you know this, Graham, but he signed to Virgin Records for a 12-album deal.
12? That can't be enforceable.
Yeah, well, as we're about to learn, at his work rate, that is insanely ambitious. So in 1984, he releases his one and only album on Virgin, Climate of Hunter. It builds on the work of Night Flights by moving further away from traditional song structures. It's kind of like an abstract, sophisti-pop-based sound with kind of stop-start minimalism that at times is really quite avant-garde. Commercial success continues to elude him.
Shockingly, with that album description.
Yeah, but something I've read multiple times the last week is that up to that point, Climate of Hunter was Virgin Records' lowest-selling album ever, which is quite staggering. What follows after this period is one of the greatest what-ifs in music nerd lore. Don't know how up on this you are, Graham. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Is that Walker begins work on a second album for Virgin with Brian Eno, Daniel Lanois, and Robert Fripp. Unfortunately, the project falls apart due to disagreements on budget and a clash of working styles.
I was going to say that's a lot of egos being combined in a single studio.
I think from what Scott Walker said, it's like, even though he's kind of like this esoteric genius, it's still when he arrives in the studio, he's like, right, I'm good to go. I know what I want. Let's get on with it. And Brian Eno, he kind of described as sort of fiddling around with the synthesizer in the background. So let's be a bit more organic about this. And it was just a real clash of 60s mode of working and 70s mode of working. Which obviously sounds
Yeah, yeah.
ridiculous when you think about Walker's records at this time.
I wonder as well, like, even if you are Scott Walker and have this singular creative vision, like having an absolutely brutal flop like that previous
Mm,
Virgin album, like that's gotta shake up your confidence a little. And if your confidence is gonna compromised, then going into a recording situation with those strong personalities has got to be a lot harder.
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't think he's somebody that particularly cares about, or he was somebody that particularly cared about money or success, but I know what you mean. It must have had an effect. And
Yeah, I think you can be disinterested in money and success, but still be like, really? That's all it sold?
yeah, yeah. I mean, the backing tracks exist for those Eno sessions, and people have heard them, but he never recorded any vocals. I'd love to hear them, but yeah, maybe one day. Walker now enters another wilderness period. It's an 11-year gap where he is largely inactive. In the early 90s, Walker signs a deal with Fontana Records to release new solo material. Before this, they reissue his first four solo albums on CD for the first time, which are well received. They also release a compilation pairing his solo hits with those of the Walker Brothers, and it's top five, so it goes to number 4 in the UK album charts.
What year was that?
That was released in 1992.
Wow, fair enough.
So there was an appetite there, basically. So by the time we get to the mid 90s, we're dealing with an artist who has burned through fame, rejected commercial expectations, and spent over a decade refining a private, uncompromising vision. So now, it is 1995. We are peak Britpop. London swings again. Fontana is hoping to capitalize on this with a
Amazing.
with a baroque pop slam dunk from a 60s icon, flush with renewed interest and catalog success. What they get is tilt.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Scott Walker period or album? And I know you said you don't care much for the first 2 albums.
I don't think they're particularly great albums, but they
Mm,
do have some real highlights on.
they really do.
I think it's Scott 3,
Yeah.
which is my favorite,
Mm.
but I recognize that Scott 4 is objectively probably the better record.
Yeah, do you know what? It's funny, I re-listened to almost everything this week, and I always would say I'm not being funny, like, when people said they like Scott 3 more than Scott 4, I was like, "You liar. You're just saying that to be like to be obtuse." And then actually listening to them in sequence, actually a crazy thing happened. I'm kinda jumping ahead here, but I listened to Tilt maybe 10 times in the last week, including on, like, really like, a big speakers on a loud system where I did nothing but just listen to that record.
Okay, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
No, like, challenging, but amazing.
Yeah, and then I went back to his early stuff, and the first 2 records, yeah, you're right, there's some real highlights, but they're really good. But you know what's coming, so it's hard to kind of get that invested in them, and then listening to Scott 3 and 4 back to back, I was like, "You know what? Actually, Scott 3 might be better than Scott 4. I might like it more." But the really surprising thing was I was like, "I actually don't know whether after this experience, do I like Tilt more than any of these 4 records?" Which is not something I expected at all. But you're a Scott 3 man, that kind of later period, there's nothing from there, you kind of super into The Drift or something?
I really respect Tilt, like, an enormous amount, more so now I know that Fontana were not expecting it.
Yeah.
Um, like, I love Farmer in the City. Like, I think that's,
Yeah,
like, an
it's
amazing
amazing, yeah.
track, and, shit, I've pulled a blank on the name. Is it 21? Like, is that actually the track name, or is that just the
No,
hook?
that's what he sings over and over, doesn't it? Yeah, "Who are you? 21, 21, I'll give you 21, 21." Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah, trying to pick my words here. Scott Free is what I want to listen to, like to enjoy listening. Scott 4 is an album which is like clearly like astonishing, but I think it's just a bit too loaded with like this is a great part of the canon sort of baggage for me. I remember buying Scott 4 from a record store in Greenwich Market, and it was £5 for the CD reissue, and the sticker on the front just said, "This is the best album ever made. Deal with it."
Yeah.
I was like, "Yeah, all right, I'll take that chance for £5."
Yeah, I mean, there's some days it is. It's an amazing record. Have you heard the story, by the way, of the then Fontana's head of A&R hearing Tilt for the first time?
Preparing his resignation. No, I haven't.
So, um, this is oft repeated, and it's a cornerstone of the documentary 30th Century Man, but you read it in other places, and it's Scott Walker himself has told this story. But basically, he goes into, I guess, Metropolis to listen to Tilt completed, and they put it on the tannoys, and they like play it at like deafening, ear-splitting volume. And after like 3 tracks, he's almost like, "I can't take this anymore." And he says, um, as in the volume, and he says, "Do you mind if we listen to this on the small speakers?" I guess NS10s or whatever. And so they start to listen to like a track on the small speakers, and Scott Walker taps him on the shoulder and he says, "I'm really sorry, but do you mind if we go back to listening to them on the big speakers? Because I'm never going to listen to this record again, and this is how I want to remember it." Because that's how it worked. He was like, one as far as he was concerned, that was the end of the process. They didn't go into too much detail about, like, then what the tube ride back to the office where it's like, "Right, how am I gonna explain that this is not going to chart the way we perhaps hoped it would? This is not gonna build on the success of a Walker Brothers compilation."
Yeah,
Um,
that Damon Albarn collaboration probably isn't happening.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So on to Tilt. Tilt is a genuinely radical record, even by the standards of experimental music. It is uncompromising, dark, complex, and challenging. It pulls from jazz, classical, and the avant-garde. But I would argue that these are still broadly pop songs delivered in a pop album format. This is not difficult in the way, say, like a long prog record is difficult. It's difficult because it refuses to behave like music you already understand. Despite the fact that Walker has dropped traditional pop songwriting almost completely, these songs have at least the traces of a traditional pop structure. The journey they take you on may be difficult and unnerving, but we have not entered the world of borderless freeform jazz or classical structures such as the total work of art like Wagner's 15-hour ring cycle, indeterminate or open forms used by composers like John Cage or Stockhausen, or the eternal minimalism of Lamont Young or Satie's Vexations. This is a 56-minute pop record made by someone who has no problem completely severing any stylistic ties he has to that world. And I think this is important because Mulvey calls it difficult, but he's still reviewing it in the context of pop music. The song arrangements are made up of mostly Ligeti-inspired sound mass, like walls of sonic texture. The lyrics are often indecipherable. I swear, on the last track, "The Rosary," I hear him sing, "We Gotta Keep Pimpin'." Um, but
I know I mentioned this on the 95 Best Of episode,
okay.
but I do struggle with his vocals a bit on this record.
Okay, okay.
Like, I think I said at the time, like, there's, like, a theatricality to them, which has been ramped up
Yeah.
versus the kinda, like, late '60s pomp, and, yeah, that sometimes that works, other times, like, it gets a bit wearing for me.
Yeah, I mean, Mulvey talks about his voice being cracked, higher, quavering, occasionally nearly operatic, and as a result, curiously vulnerable. There's a contrast to the famous, powerful '60s baritone. I know what you mean. Just this album has now officially worn me down. Like, as in, it doesn't seem daunting. Not that that's not what you're saying. It doesn't seem off-puttingly idiosyncratic anymore. It's all as familiar as the original four to me.
Mhm. Would you I'm just thinking about your description, which was a lot more nuanced than what I'm about to say, but would you describe it as a drone album?
I don't think so. I mean, there are definitely drones in there, but, no, I mean, obviously he made his last album, Soused, which he makes with Sano. Obviously, that has a lot of drone bass stuff in it.
It feels inevitable that he would end up at that place
Mm.
from the trajectory he is on with Tilt.
I don't know. Despite all of the stuff that we said, it's as I say, I just don't find this record that hard going. Obviously,
Mm,
I'll not be dropping the Cockfighter at my next dinner party. Um,
disappointing.
yeah, but
I'll
this,
be washing my hair that night then.
yeah, but this album is as we said, is like the work of a musical virtuoso. You can't help but not just marvel at, but also enjoy the record's kind of audacious brilliance. I think that's kind of where I've got to it. It's
Yeah, I worry I'm jumping ahead here, but
mm,
that for me, like Scott Walker and his creativity is the most interesting part of the whole thing. Like that kind of like that creative arc and the career arc he goes on. Like I find that endlessly fascinating.
yeah,
And with albums like Tilt and kind of onwards, for me, it's almost like that is in support of the kind of the story of the person rather than being the kind of the centerpiece, if you like. Like I find the kind of I find the myth of Scott Walker, not even the myth, I find that the legend of Scott Walker, like I'm really glad that he existed and his career worked the way it did.
yeah. Although I'm going to kind of go on a bit to talk about how that legend is different for people our age than the people that would have been reviewing this music or receiving it in the 80s and 90s, basically.
Yeah, fair.
Because I think it's a bit more nuanced for us, or rather, the nuance is different.
I feel like our interpretation is slightly airbrushed. I think if you are
Mm.
encountering these records in a pre-online discourse era, it's a bit more challenging.
Well, I think it's like the friction between what he was in the 60s and what he became in the 80s and 90s. It just, having gone through like, you know, loads of YouTube interviews and TV performances, radio interviews, press interviews, like that just seems to be at the heart of all the coverage about him at that time. And I think it's key to understanding how Tilt was received in 1995. So as I said, I mean, this week I watched Muriel Gray interview him on 80s music TV institution The Tube to promote the album Climate of Hunter. I listened to Julian Cope's career revitalizing compilation and listened to Stuart McConey interview him around the time of Tilt on BBC Radio. Just what struck me about these three people, well, they were all born between the interviewers. They were all born, and Cope, the compiler, they were all born between 57 and 61. So Walker is a part of their childhood in a way that is completely unimaginable to us.
Yeah, yeah.
There's so much talk of him being reclusive, despite the long gaps between albums and lack of live performances. I've always experienced him as being consistently kind of around, giving interviews to relevant publications and programs that would be interested in his music. Yet to them, he seems like a myth. He's like a ghost. It's like in the BBC interview, McConey refers to Tilt with the mythic, the most extraordinary pop album made by anyone ever. For Mulvey and McConey, Scott Walker is a lost star returning. For us, he's almost the opposite, an enigmatic figure we work backwards from. I was trying to think of like what an example would be of his career that would be the same for us. I kind of imagine like George Michael if he faded into obscurity through the 90s and then returned 10 years later with an abstract song cycle about futurism, kind of promoting it only through The Wire and NTS.
Really, really wish that had happened. That's a fucking great story.
Yeah, yeah. And I think aside from knowing the Walker brothers as a kid, I think Scott Walker always seemed multifaceted to me. I discovered his work, or rather listened to it in a rush. Like I heard the progressively more out there MOR albums of the 60s bleed into the avant disco of Night Flights, the warped AOR of Climate of Hunter, and the monolithic austerity of Tilt. Probably in the space of about a month, to be honest, like somewhere around 2005. Like I was aware of all these albums. They were part of an established canon, with Tilt obviously occupying a special place as something you could only tackle when you were ready.
Night Flights took up so much headspace for me during that
Mm,
kind of period
yeah.
because like it was out of print, like aspects of it were like kind of danceable.
Yes.
Like Yeah, that all sort of like that felt like a very exciting album. Like helped in no small part by the scarcity.
Yeah, and it's a funny thing about Night Flights. I think at that time we were like big into like disco and avant disco and all this kind of surrounding genres, and it's funny how the album sounds so of the time, except when you get to Tilt, which sounds like completely out of time with anything. And I think, yeah, in 1995, you can only imagine, just as it does in 2026, Tilt occupies this, as I say, this kind of world on its own. But as previously touched upon, at this point, the UK is completely in the grips of an all-consuming nostalgia for the 60s. This is the same cultural moment that's celebrating Blur, Oasis, and Pulp, music rooted in familiarity, nostalgia, and recognizable forms. And the influence of Walker's albums from this period, this 60s period, can be heard in bands like The Divine Comedy, My Life Story, and of course Pulp. But he's light years ahead of them. Like they are grafting symphonic pop, kitchen sink lyricism, and MOR irony onto a 90s indie template. He has no template. His references bring into question what music actually is and can be on an elemental level.
Yeah, it's so incredibly singular, and like yeah, like I struggle to really come up with any reference points. I'm sure they're there, but I am not equipped to identify them.
Yeah, and I said there's no analog when, of course, you could say mm, Lou Reed or David Bowie or Nico or, or Mark Hollis, or Mark Hollis maybe is the closest.
I'm gonna reuse this one from the Christmas episode,
Yeah.
but I do think there is a tenuous analogy you could make with Isaac Hayes
Okay.
in terms of like they both start off like quite sort of pop chart focused with regards to like his Scott Engel stuff and then the Walker Brothers. Same way that Isaac Hayes starts off as kind of like backroom producer and songwriter with Stax Records for their big hit singles. And then when they take on their solo careers, they're both much more interested in these kind of orchestral epics.
Okay.
Like it sort of follows up to that point. But then, when you get into the back half of their careers, like Scott Walker's recording Tilt and Isaac Hayes is releasing Chocolate Salty Balls. So, the analogy falls apart.
Yeah. Well, he never got to the chocolate salty balls period. I think there's a classic example of how ill suited he is to the moment. In that, believe it or not, he appeared on Later with Jules Holland in 1995.
Did Jules add some honky tonk piano?
No, he didn't. I can tell you that the performance, it's like he introduces him and then steps away, and then they cut to him performing the song, but they like removed everybody had to leave the studio. So it's just the cameraman and Scott Walker. I guess he was like, "I'll do this, but under these circumstances."
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
you know, he's doing the track Rosary, which is the last track on Tilt. It's amazing. It's an incredible performance, as you would imagine, kind of captivatingly intense with this kind of minimalist avant-garde guitar work. But then you look at like who's on the bill around him. It's like a young Britpoppy Supergrass and Paul Weller, who at this point is obviously in full real music dad rock phase.
Yeah, yeah.
So, in 1995, Tilt, it's not just difficult, it's like confrontationally out of step.
Yeah, yeah. It's like utterly alien, like extraterrestrial music.
Yeah.
Tonight he'll rise, he'll sell his arms to anyone who asks about.
Well, we're going to shift gears a bit now. um, my approach this week reuses a couple of ideas from previous episodes. The first of which is that point where the crown of most important band changes hands and how that happens. I think it's probably naive to suggest that you can isolate that to like any single point, but the juxtaposition of these two bands and these two stories in the same issue was just too good to resist. So let's get into this is the greatest band in the world, Stone Roses' live return, which sees them play live in Norway. It's their first gig in 5 years. It's their debut with a new lineup. Robbie Maddox having stepped in on drums 2 weeks earlier after longtime drummer and general sort of totem Rennie abruptly quit before the tour started after, according to John Squire, in I think a 2012 XFM interview, falling out with Ian Brown during rehearsals.
I did not know that.
No, neither did I until researching this. It could just be some quality John Squire shit stirring.
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
Indeed. So, Second Coming, the Stone Roses follow up to their kind of, you know, era defining debut album, has released after this insanely protracted birth the previous December to some pretty mixed reviews. As the press tries to make sense of like the kind of like this move to like Led Zeppelin indebted blues rock and the abandonment of any real link to dance music. This short run of gigs was supposed to be followed by a secret UK tour in April. That tour promptly leaked to the press in the UK and was cancelled in response to the leak, which is very Stone Roses.
Don't ruin the myth.
Yeah, exactly. Like very classically grumpy Stone Roses. There's a Glastonbury headline slot due for June of 1995, so a couple of months' time. That gets pulled when John Squire breaks his collarbone a couple of weeks earlier, falling off a mountain bike in California. Not being funny, but like mountain biking in California for a lead guitarist feels like really ill-advised holiday activity.
I also can't imagine John Squire on a mountain bike.
I mean, maybe he fell off because his hair was obstructing his eyes.
Yeah. Can't imagine wearing a helmet.
um, they finally manage a UK stadium tour in November and December of 1995. They then go quiet, and Squire splits the following April. For more on which, go and find episode 2 of this podcast. So, getting to the article, our intrepid writer, it's Dave Simpson in this case, is clearly a fan. Like the kind of the framing is of someone who is like able to like get a certain level of access to the band. So, for example, he encounters the group at their hotel pre-gig and on their way to a record store signing session. He quite quickly claims, like during that meeting, that with the crucial exception of Squire, they're all like very sort of lively and bright. But he makes the point that they're almost kind of forcing it a bit. So there's the doubt, which has already been implanted by Second Coming's sort of foibles. That's clearly weighing on Dave Simpson's mind. He signs off his section with quote, "Christ, we love the Roses. Will we ever love them so much again?" Question mark. The scene shifts to the venue via a quick photo shoot, and the doors open late after an extended sound check. So the band don't get on stage till 10 p.m. Now, by 2026 UK standards, this seems insanely late, but that's probably because I'm in my mid-40s and I would be outraged if a band came on at this time now.
Yeah, right, yeah. If I'm gonna stay for 10 minutes, then I'm leaving.
Yeah, they better front load this set.
Yeah.
The band launch into I Want to Be Adored, and Simpson notes a couple of missing snare hits, is his quote. But it's safe to say he's very much willing the band on. He describes the new album as the brilliant Second Coming, and that brilliance as being the catalyst for the Roses becoming what he describes as a harder, more guitar frenzied, rock smoking beast. Um,
Rock smoking?
yeah, I know. It's like,
Play on crack.
yeah, it's like I think you've said too much, Dave.
Yeah.
um, As a side note, he also seems to advocate for John Squire's decision to wear what looks like a woolen tank top out of like a 70s soap opera. He describes this look as lean and hungry, which might just be a very particular kind of euphemism, because I have no doubt that at this point in time, John Squire was indeed lean and hungry from his lifestyle choices.
In fact, I think he was on the cover of Lean and Hungry magazine that month.
Yeah, fold out poster.
I like 'em lean and hungry.
um, the band play 10 Story Love Song. And like this is used in the piece as a kind of like hinge point of the set. Simpson described it as the ante is upped. You can feel the years melting away like they've never been gone. At this point, he decides to get in some crowd-based vox pops, which is where the article's title comes from. This is the greatest band in the world, if you recall. So on these vox pops, 5 out of 6 people he quizzes claim that the Roses are better now than they were back then, like then being 89, 90.
It's like interviewing people coming out of the Phantom Menace in 1999.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like the most objective environment. It's worth pointing out that the Roses had played Oslo previously in 1990,
Okay.
so this was not their first visit to Oslo. There's a couple of other crowd quote gems here. The most egregious being the new songs are the best so far. And then, yeah, Simpson gets back to the gig and starts fawning about a 3-song acoustic section, which breaks up the middle of the set. He describes this like, yeah, he describes this is great, like REM Unplugged or U2 circa Acting Baby, only so much more intimate and soulful.
Who's doing the vocals?
Uh, well,
Be my first question.
I mean, we will very much be getting into that shortly, but,
Okay.
like, I'm gonna pause there. And, like, we've talked about how we're a bit too young for the Stone Roses. Like, we were not there for the kinda for that era-defining sort of imperial phase, and, kinda our understanding of how they affected, like, alternative culture is all very much secondhand.
Absolutely.
But in 1995, with everything like we talked about previously about the Stone Roses, and with what we've heard about that kind of 89, 90 era on the ground, this feels like a really off comparison for the Stone Roses to compare them to REM or U2. That doesn't feel like the kind of edgy, countercultural, like basically just cool vibe that people would want from the Stone Roses.
No, but but there actually it's quite but if you think about REM in particular, it's the independent to major switch of, like, beloved indie band. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because they're on Geffen at this point, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's almost like fan casting their later catalog. Do you know what I mean? It's like maybe this second album's not great, but maybe their automatic for the people is gonna be album 3 or 4. It's like you're putting them up on that pedestal a bit.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting take.
'Cause I think that's probably how you would have thought about them at the time, right? You wouldn't be like, "Well, this is it." Like, they were stuck in a bit of a hole. They've made a okay second album that I'm sure will be like, you know, when they've got 8 albums under their belt, we'll be like, "Oh, that one's a bit shit." But, like, if you for those that knew, kinda hung around and they got really good and, had different phases and all that stuff.
Yeah, if you're thinking of them as a long-term prospect, I can see how you might compartmentalize Second Coming as like, this is a transitional album. I can't wait to see what comes next.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I'd wanted to stay away from this because it came out in 1994 and there is the possibility that it will come up in a future episode. But without getting into the sort of track by track detail on Second Coming too much, like what was your like experience of that album and the singles, like, at the time?
I remember watching the video for Love Spreads on Top of the Pops because they didn't do a Top of the Pops appearance, I remember that. Or maybe they did, but they didn't for to promote that track. I feel like they didn't, and the video was, like, premiered as, like, a big to-do. Also, I recall it, like, entered the charts at number 2, so it was seen as, like, a big deal. I have a slightly different relationship to them than you because obviously I had an older brother, older sister, so, like, not necessarily them, but, like, their friends, they were, like, a band that was a bit more around for me, do you know what I mean? Because they were a bit more that age.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and it was seen as something particularly actually a friend of my sister's I can think of that was just like, "This is the best band ever, and they're back, and this album's amazing, and, you need to listen to it." To the point actually where I actually listened to Second Coming quite a lot in the back half of '95. But tellingly, I remember I think I left my bag on the train, and, like, one of our friends, like, picked it up, and they would like, I had my Walkman in it, and they were looking at what I had on my Walkman, and it was a tape copy of Second Coming, and, like, of our 2 friends, like, one of them had not heard of the Stone Roses, and it was like he was, like, trying to explain to them who they were and played him, like, Love Spreads. It's like, "You know this band, you've heard this on the radio, right?" Do you know what I mean? To that I mean, I think that kinda illustrates your point quite well, that obviously we knew who they were, and we had a kind of understanding of what they meant, especially because the enemy would frequently run quite tabloidy kind of I think there's literally a cover with Ian Brown on it, which uses the kind of like the Sun the famous Sun headline from the Falklands War, so this is like gotcha, and there's like a
Yes, yeah, that's in our archives.
okay, and it's like a picture of Ian Brown, and I guess sort of somewhere near the studio they were recording, and it's and it's, as I recall, it's not a feature; it's like a news story. So you're kind of absorbing all of that as a kid, but at the same time, as I said, I kind of half liked Second Coming in a kind of it's an album I have on tape, so I'm going to listen to it because I've got like 13 albums or something, but not much more than that. I don't think I was still listening to it the following year. I do think 10 Story Love Song's really good.
Yeah, same. Although, as part of researching this section, I was surprised to find how much I enjoyed Love Spurts as well.
Yeah, it's great. It's a really good song. Did you listen to Second Coming this week?
There are 3 tracks that really stood out to me. Like the 2 singles, and Driving South.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, Driving South is, like, the kinda, like, the absolute apex of all of that sort of, like, cock-waving, coked up guitar wank.
Yeah.
Um,
Is it the first track?
no, it's the second.
Oh, okay, okay.
Like, Driving South starts and it's like, "Oh, sweet, this Top Gear compilation is amazing."
Yeah.
But it's like, I'm there for it, like, because it's so unapologetic. It's like, "Yeah, this is ludicrous." I'm like, I am totally down for that. Whereas I feel like a lot of the other stuff on there, like, turns into, like, my dad's, like, Gary Moore albums,
Okay.
where it's like, this is an awful lot of, like, John Squire showcasing his virtuosity to fill the gap left where the song should be.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Going back to the singles, like, they're both great records, and for a long time, like, I had often wondered why 10 Story Love Song was not the first single. Like, it sounds so sort of like Britpop era number 1.
It really does.
It's, like, baffling to me that it wasn't the first single, or rather it was baffling to me that it was not the first single. But of all the things on Second Coming, like, hearing Love Spreads again, it's like, okay, I can see, like, the DNA trace back to the previous album here.
Okay.
The "Let Me Put You in the Picture," like, hook, and, like, the rhythm Ian Brown delivers that in, it's like, it's still got a bit of a groove and a bit of a slink. It's not like the kinda like the Jimmy Page Rock God thing. Considering the album was, like, a December release, I think, if you put a single campaign in that context, like it's the end of the year, then 10 Story Love Song is a hell of a kinda, like, December number 1.
Yeah.
Love Spreads makes more sense as something that's not gonna alienate or scare off the casual Stone Roses fan in 1994,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it's like it's almost like Love Spreads is still wedded to the slight kinda lack of ambition, maybe, of kinda pre-Britpop indie.
Interesting.
Like, it's insular enough, like, it's not trying to kinda, like, bring people with it, whereas I would argue that 10 Story Love Song is, would have been a number 1 single. Anyway, let's get back to the gig because we have finished the acoustic section now, and we are moving on to the home straight. After the acoustic set finishes, they come back and play Made of Stone, and our eye in the crowd claims that this prompts universal raptures. He describes the looks on these faces, the look on my face probably, even Manny's grinning like a Cheshire cat, looking like he's about to spontaneously combust. As the set approaches its end, the fateful quote of, "If they're like this at Glastonbury, it's going to be worth every minute," gets dropped. As we said, thanks to John Squire's mountain bike antics, it's not like this at Glastonbury.
No.
So, set done. Dave Simpson gets backstage, talks to the band. There's a post-gig final word from John Squire. Come and see us in Paris and Glastonbury. We'll be rocking by then, all right. And final word, again, to Dave Simpson. Welcome at last to the reoccupation. The Stone Roses, all caps, are back. But we are not just going to take this article's word for it. Thanks to the miracle of technology and the stoicism of a Norwegian Stone Roses fan, this gig is available in admittedly lo-fi form on YouTube.
Oh, nice.
So I have taken one for the team and I have sat through this gig. So some thoughts that I will go through.
You had to be there.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's a defining one.
Yeah.
First off, they would have really, really benefited from more rehearsal. Like, when they open with I Want to Be Adored, it sounds punch drunk. Like, everyone is trying to remember how the song goes and what band they're in. I mean, I get it. Like, they brought in Robbie Maddox 2 weeks previously, but, like, they really should have just, like, pushed the dates back and given themselves more rehearsal space.
Mm,
Ian Brown, like, there's no way, like, we can not talk about Ian Brown's vocals.
yes.
The second song in this set is She Bangs the Drums. And Ian Brown sounds like he's fronting an oi band. Like, it is the most graceless honking, like, that borders on, like, boot boy hollering.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
that's brilliant. Graceless honking. I love it.
And on the subject of banging drums, this is, like, absolutely leaden, like, kind of pub rock drumming for the kind of material that, at least on that in that first album, Mirror, is so distinctive for being super light on its feet, like we talked about before. Like, this is kind of like blues, like, kind of trudge,
Okay.
which is much, much better suited to the Second Coming material. But I mean, despite the crowd's, like, objections, like, I'm not sure that's why many people would want to go and see the Stone Roses.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, we were talking about 10 Story Love Song. In this set, like, 10 Story Love Song is an absolute atrocity. Like, I'm clinging to the idea that it's a fantastic song, but in this recording, it sounds like a band falling asleep on stage. Like, it's just audibly slowing down.
It's a good song, but it's like a top 30 Britpop singles song. Let's be honest. That's still very good.
That's a valid ranking. I
Yeah.
have no objections. You know what, though? The acoustic interlude I was chatting shit about previously, is actually pretty good.
Okay.
I'd included in that is Tightrope and Elizabeth, My Dear. It's really noticeable how Ian Brown's vocals pick up. Like, when he's not, like, straining to be heard over, like, Squire's, like, wall of guitar and, like, Robbie Maddox's, like, artless thumping, it's like, "Oh, all right, like, now you've got space to, like, sing rather than just, like, wail." This isn't, like, completely irredeemable. I mean, they play I Am the Resurrection, and, like, the back half of that is like, that moves closer to what I'd describe as, like, Seahorse's album cut guitar workout. Like, it's literally like, I don't know what Ian Brown is doing for 10 minutes. Driving South, which is that other, like, Second Coming highlight, we talked about, that does the whole Led Zeppelin parody thing with, like, at this point, like, Ian Brown's vocals are barely audible. You can also tell that Driving South has an awful lot of guitar overdubs
Yeah.
on the recorded version. None of those are here. It's like, oh, there's not a lot to this without the guitar overdubs. I think Ian Brown's just given up at this point.
Scratching his maracas.
Yeah. Made a Stone sort of limps along, like, with, like, kind of vocals I've just written down as being grimly amusing.
Okay.
But the sometimes I fantasize bit, like, that genuinely sounds like a pub at closing time. It's unbelievable. And then finally, Love Spirits pops up to close. I owe an on-mic apology to my dog.
Okay.
My dog had just come back from the vets from being castrated, and was in this, like, haze of painkiller, like, opiation, with having to listen to this train wreck. It's like, it's a wonder he'll still be in the same house as me. Anyway, final word. But yeah, like, I don't know what gig Dave Simpson was at, but, like, clearly he had to be there.
Join us next week for part 2 of our 2-part look at the Enemy and Melody Maker from the 29th of April 1995. We'll be looking at Oasis on the verge of world domination and Snoop Doggy Dogg's Murder Was the Case.
In the meantime, you can find us on the socials and most of the usual places. That's Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all under the Analog Slop name. That's all one word and spelt ANALOGUESLOP. However, if you prefer your podcasts to involve static pictures, we are also on YouTube. That channel is youtube.com/ANALOGUE slop. And finally, if you want to send us an email, we're reachable predictably on analogslop@gmail.com.